Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Housing and Social Wellbeing Committee. Can I first introduce the top table? To my right here, I have Adam Taylor, who from Committee Services, and to my left, I have Barbara Taylor, the Executive, Barbara Renton. Well, Taylor, your maiden name by any chance?
No.
God, that would have been good. Barbara Renton, the Executive Director for Communities, and further on is Claire Mailer, who's the Executive Lead for Transformation and Change. I will now ask Adam to confirm any apologies received and take the roll call. Members, please.
Okay. Morning, members. So we've got apologies this morning from Councillor Smith, who will be substituted by Councillor Allen. We've got apologies from Councillor Chan, substituted by Councillor Duff, and apologies from Councillor Ahern, substituted by Councillor Forbes. I will just announce who we've actually got with us in the chamber, and then just ask those who are online to confirm whether they're actually in the meeting. So with us in the chamber this morning, we've got Councillor Allen, Councillor Peter Barrett, Councillor Braun, Councillor Donaldson, Councillor Frampton, Councillor Leishman, Councillor McPherson, convener, you're here obviously, and Councillor McLaren. Can I just ask Councillor Brock to confirm whether you're online, please?
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor James?
Morning, Adam. Yep, I'm here, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor McCall?
Present. Thank you.
And finally, Councillor Welsh?
I'm present. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you. That's everybody present, convener.
Can I just remind councillors and officers joining remotely to use the chat box to indicate you want to participate in the meeting, and for those in the chamber, you can raise your hands and I'll take note of that. Thank you. Can I have declarations of interest? I'll give the chat a bit of time. I'll take it then there's no declarations of interest. Can we move on to the minute of the previous meeting? Do we have anything anybody would like to raise? Therefore, can we agree the minute of the last meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Agreed.
There was an outstanding business statement from the previous meeting that the committee had been made aware of. Is there anything anybody would like to raise in relation to that? That's good. We'll move on then. And so item 5 on the agenda is the police and fire reform, local community engagement. Just before I ask local senior officer Scott Gibson and acting group commander Mike Runge to introduce their quarterly report, I'd like to make reference to the recent retirement of Group Commander Ewan Baird. Ewan retired from the service on the 30th of August after 27 years, 6 months in service. During this time, he served communities across the area in various roles and was delighted to finish his career as District Manager of Perth and Kinross. I would like to thank Ewan for his substantial contribution to the work of the committee over the last 2 years and wish him all the very best in the future and an enjoyable retirement. Do any other members like to comment? Councillor Braun.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I would just like to add my good wishes to Ewan Baird for his retirement and to thank him for all his help during the time of my tenure as convener. And I know my colleague, Councillor Ahern, would also like to add his good wishes, as he obviously had responsibility for the police and fire reports during that time. So if we can manage my best wishes to Ewan for his retirement and for the future. Thank you, convener.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, convener, and really just want to associate myself with the comments that you've made, and also Councillor Braun, and wish Ewan all the very best in his retirement, and express my appreciation for his leadership and his engagement, both personal on behalf of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service in delivering better outcomes for Perth and Kinross across the whole of the community planning partnership spectrum. Thank you.
Can I ask Senior Officer Scott Gibson and Acting Commander Mike Runge to introduce the report, please? I think you're on mute still. We're not hearing anything in the chamber from the. There's a mic is going to.
If
Morning,
it
everyone.
helps, Convener, we do hear you online.
Hi, morning, everyone. Scott, I think, might be struggling to hear at his end, so I can start the report. So going through the report for Q1 for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, performance summary. Over the piece, it's been a fairly positive time for us. Accidental dwelling fires were low. We attended 18 of those across the area. There were no accidental dwelling fire fatalities, and the casualties numbers were low at 1. The number of non-domestic building fires, 11, reflected a decrease for this quarter and is equal to the 3-year average. The number of road traffic collisions for Q1 is reflecting an increase against the 3-year average for this quarter, but there's a decrease in the same quarter last year. And the number of unwanted fire alarm signals caused by AFAs in non-domestic buildings was 117. I'll give it more context on that as I deliver my side of the report. So accidental dwelling fires over the period there was 18. The number for the reporting period is lower than the same period last year and is reporting the lowest number of fire for the last 5 years. Of the 18 incidents we attended, 12 were cooking related, with the remaining incidents being caused by faulty equipment and chimney fires. We continue to work with partners to give safety advice to those most at risk and vulnerable, particularly around unintentional harm within the home. Road traffic collisions, there was 17 across the quarter. Totals are in line with the 3-year average, although the previous reporting periods were during COVID lockdowns. There were no trends identified. The Road Safety Partnership across the area has been set up to constantly review our current position in relation to road safety, and Perth Fire Station was the venue for the first rider refinement course that was held in May with Police Scotland, and the course was well received by those who attended. There are 7 sessions programmed in, and so far 5 have been delivered. On unwanted fire alarm signals, of the 236 false alarm incidents that we attended, 117 of these were UFAS incidents. The Scottish Fire and Rescue Service engaged with duty holders to educate them on the impact that UFAS has on their businesses, the community and the fire service. Of the remaining false alarm totals, 6 of them were malicious calls, and the fire service is currently working through the engagement plan for the UFAS reduction strategy implementation. Community safety engagement across the quarter. Following the higher than average water related deaths and injuries across Scotland last year, the fire service contacted all secondary schools in the area and delivered water safety presentations and spoke to pupils on the dangers of water. The feedback from the schools was very positive. Over the quarter, 4 water rescues were reported. 1 adult male was led to safety. 2 kayakers were rescued at Kinloch Rannoch, and there were 2 searches of the River Tay. Fire Service are currently looking at implementing a wildfire strategy, of which Pitlochry and Airless stations have been selected as the wildfire stations for the area. The personnel will be trained to a higher level and supplied with specialist vehicles and equipment. This has been put to tender, and plans are to receive this in 2023. The Fire Service attended a wildfire incident at Gleneagles Hotel, with crews from Auchterarder, Crieff and Perth attending. The fire occurred in an area between the shooting school and the Glenmore Holiday Village and covered an area around 300 by 100 metres. The fire was driven by very strong winds on the day. The dry vegetation and underfoot conditions made the fire very challenging to extinguish, and crews were on scene for around 10 hours. Now, that concludes my side of the report, and we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from members of the committee? Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, convener. And I'd just like to say I'm not sure that I've ever seen all the indicators in the performance summary all showing green and being better than the headline targets. So we want to commend the fire service on that performance. With regard to accidental dwelling fires indicator H1, I wondered if there were any common factors among the 18 fires which might identify where preventative targeting work could be undertaken, you know, whether that's by population or localities.
Thanks.
Mr. Runge.
And apologies, convener and members, my volume wasn't working at the start there. I'll start with the answer to the question and then I'll hand over to Mike for a bit more detail. But we do, each reporting period, we do look through the statistics and the areas affected and the age groups and the causes, etc., of all our accidental dwelling fires. And if we do see any trends or any areas that we can add value to or work with, then what we do is we use our community safety engagement teams and our local crews to try and target those areas. I suppose this ties in nicely with the questions I've been receiving quite recently, a lot recently, on the cost of living crisis that we're going through at present and what we might see going forward in regards to accidental dwelling fires. And we're doing a lot of targeted work around that and a lot of communicating around that for local communities in regard to the potential risks that may bring up, such as how they heat their homes and single room living, etc. But just to be assured that we do look at all the factors relating to all our accidental dwelling fires, and we do target areas where we see any trends identified. I don't know if you've got anything else to add to that, Mike.
Not overly, Scott, but for the reporting period, the majority of the incidents were all, no trends were identified. It was all adults either between 18 and 64 or the elderly that were involved in the incidents. And at the incidents, we'd obviously be carrying out post-domestic incident reviews with occupiers to give advice and support where necessary. But nothing really further to add from Scott's input there.
Are you happy with that?
Yeah, thanks very much, convener. I think the single room living aspect is maybe something that we can work up some comms on. So,
Councillor Forbes.
Yeah, I was just interested in if the fire service have any input into the Scottish Government's rules or laws on interlinked smoke alarms, because I hear anecdotally that a lot of households haven't got themselves involved in that yet. Are you having any input into that, encouraging people to do that, or do you have any comments on it?
So again, I'll start, then I'll hand over to Mike for anything in particular we're doing locally. But in regard to our input on the legislation was brought out by Scottish Government, and we didn't have any input on the legislation itself. We don't enforce the legislation. What we do is we go out and we risk assess. We risk assess each individual as an individual case, and that determines the level of input we'll have into them. And depending on what that risk assessment throws up, will depend on whether we fit an interlinked smoke detector system. If they don't meet the criteria and they didn't have any smoke detection, but as I say, they didn't meet the criteria for the interlinked system, we would still fit our legacy standalone systems until such time that they could get the interlinked system put in. But we would encourage occupiers and owners to try and push on and try and get the interlinked smoke detection system, because it is a more superior system than the standalone system, obviously, because it is interlinked and it puts that signal out throughout the house. Should one detector go off, then it goes right throughout the whole house. Anything to add to that, Mike?
Yeah, I think there is issues, not with the fire service, but you know, for the wider public for purchasing interlinked smoke detectors from you know, stores, etc. I think that there's a shortage due to various reasons, but I would definitely echo Scott's comments there and encourage anybody to, as possible, get that higher standard of detection within their property.
Councillor Forbes.
Thanks for that. Do you, by any chance, just happen to have any idea how many percentage-wise houses don't have it that should have it at this point in time? Because it's clearly the right thing to do, but I'm certainly in constituents' houses regularly and can anecdotally just glance up and see they're not there. So I'm wondering if you had any information as to what the percentage is for take-up.
So, thanks, Councillor Forbes. No, we wouldn't. We to be honest, we don't have that information. We would have to be in everyone's houses to get those percentages. As I say, we tend to prioritise our high risk and those that have come through the referral pathway, and we go in and do the risk assessment within them. And we also go into anyone's house that requests a home fire safety visit or has had a home fire safety visit from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and they get flagged up for a revisit periodically. And as we go around those properties and advise on detection in those properties, we would advise them to go for the higher standard detection systems. But in regard to your specific question, we wouldn't have a percentage on that. I know that a lot of households, as we know, are going through the cost of living crisis, and it may be that they just can't afford it at the moment, and they've got the standalone systems. I know that if you do through the legislation, if you carry out work on your property, the construction work, you should be replacing your standalone systems with the interlinked systems, and obviously any new builds have the interlinked systems. But no, that's all of the information I would really have on it at the moment, Councillor Forbes.
No, that's okay. Thanks very much.
Can I ask Elaine Ritchie to comment on our position within the social housing stock that we look after as a council on this matter?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yep. In terms of our stock, we've got 7,985 properties, and under about 2% don't have the interlinked smoke alarms, but all of that 2% have been visited. It's access issue that we have with our tenants to gain access to their properties. We're working really, really hard with our colleagues to get access to these properties, and we're now potentially looking at forced access. So the majority of our properties have interlinked smoke alarms. It's only a small minority that don't.
Thank you very much. Next question from Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. Once again, just to remark, it's a great report with everything looking green. One of the biggest problems that you'll have, or one of the things that will cause your staff the biggest angst, I would suppose, is the amount of false alarms. And I noticed that you have a fair amount of false alarms. For the non-domestic ones, you're suggesting that 83% of those are down to equipment failure. Do you find when you're doing your investigations and your analysis that these are the same companies or the same businesses, and is it repeating? And if so, what can we do to reduce that number for you so that there's less frustration?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Allen. It's a really valid point, and it's something that we're well aware of as an organisation, that unwanted fire alarm signals is a huge part of our activity that we try to reduce. We do have in place UFAS reduction strategies, so when our local crews go out and respond to these types of incidents, they've got postcards with information for occupiers to try and put in place reduction strategies. Such things as maybe relocating detector systems, cleaning systems, making sure that they're serviced on a regular basis. We recommend all of those types of things. And if we do see any repeat offenders, or we do come across multiple calls to the same premise, then our fire safety enforcement teams well, this will be flagged up with them, and they'll then go out and visit these premises and again liaise with the duty holder and see if we can put some reduction strategies in place. Members will also be aware of our the call challenging from AFAs that we're about to commence with into next year. We haven't got confirmed dates on that yet, but this is hopefully going to see a huge reduction in the number of automatic fire alarms from non-domestic premises that we attend, and hopefully see a big reduction in blue light journeys and a big reduction in that type of activity, which will give us a lot more time to carry out other activities such as training and community safety. I don't know if you've got anything else to add to that, Mike.
No, we're just being proactive out in the community with businesses when we are there, when crews are attending, just to encourage them to take steps to reduce the chance of a reactivation from the same issue. But crews are being proactive with it and trying to get the message across to businesses, the impact it's having.
I suppose, Councillor Allen, just to add to that, yeah, I would encourage members with their constituents and duty holders of businesses, etc., of these premises, just to encourage them to try and put measures in place to try and stop this, because as we know, it does cause unnecessary blue light journeys, and it does affect business continuity and cost to the community because of that business continuity in local areas. So yeah, we just encourage members to engage with duty holders as well when they get a chance, and try and reduce these types of incidents. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and the answer is fairly comprehensive. I was asking the question from a position of perhaps strength. I live in Auchterarder, and your local crews spend an awful lot of time running up that hill to Glen Eagles Hotel. So if there are issues and there's anything I can help with, please let me know.
Thanks, Councillor Allen, that's appreciated.
Thank you. Councillor Welsh.
Again, commend the report, and interesting for reading for me as a new councillor. I guess my question is relating to obviously the current energy crisis and potentially fire service concerns that people will be reopening chimneys to burn wood, be inexperienced with this, and potentially the prospect of chimney fires. Is there anything in advance of the heating system that we or the fire service can do to send out, a notification to homeowners to get, for example, their chimneys swept, and provide some information to support them doing that?
Thanks, Councillor Welsh, and I appreciate your comments on the report itself. As I previously mentioned, there is a lot of communications and a lot of work going on in the background at the moment through our media channels and through communications within the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service in regard to the cost of living crisis. And at the start of October, the Prevention and Protection Directorate are going to be carrying out a Scotland-wide engagement with all stakeholders and inviting them all along just to go through some of the issues and some of the risks that we see as an organisation from our perspective of it. So I mentioned things like single room living, using old gas appliances, and other things like bypassing gas meters, etc. And one of the things that we are going to be communicating on and engaging on is opening old fireplaces and chimneys, because as you say, there's potential there for fires to occur within chimneys and then spread into roof spaces, as we know, especially if they're old and dilapidated, then there's potential there for that fire spread. So yeah, we will be putting communications out, and we do currently, as we're out and about doing our community engagements throughout the Perth and Kinross area, we are putting this message out, and I would encourage members to do the same when they're speaking to their constituents. As we know, Perth and Kinross has a large rural area with a lot of chimneys in place, and as we know, people are going to look at any ways they can to heat their homes over the coming months to try and reduce costs.
Thank you.
Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. First of all, again, well done for a good report, all green. As I say, I don't recall ever seeing it like that before, and Councillor Barrett's confirmed my memory is still in place, so that's a good thing. My question is related to wildfires, and I note in the report it mentions that there are specialist centres at Pitlochry and Ayleth, and of course I live in a rural area myself, and I'm thinking that in a situation, it may well be stations such as Carmichael and Glenshee will be the first responders. I'm just really checking that they would have the training to be able to hold the fire until specialist units arrive. Of course, Blairgowrie might be behind them. They may all arrive before Pitlochry and Ayleth do. So will they have the training to be able to hold the fire before the specialist units arrive? And the other part of it is, given that farmers obviously burn off heather and that in certain times of year, has there been any training or education for them to watch and mind what they're doing, bear in mind the weather we're having?
Thanks, Councillor Braun, and again, appreciate the comments on the report. I didn't get to do it at the start, but I think, in my experience, it's the first time I've seen a report that we've presented that's been all green as well. So that's really positive and good to see. In regard to the wildfire, yes, in answer to your first question, all our staff go through the basic training on wildfire, so the basic modules on wildfire, and have the basic equipment to tackle any type of wildfire in the early stages. And the Pitlochry and Ayleth upskill is going to involve what we would call a level 2 and a level 3 response. So level 2 being things like knapsacks and things for cutting out fire breaks and etc. And level 3 being the actual vehicles, all-terrain vehicles that we can take up into hillsides and off-road to move equipment about and move personnel about. With these types of incidents, they're quite high risk for us. They're quite always usually in remote areas, quite arduous for our crews because of the location and the work getting equipment from A to B. And what I would say that through our wildfire strategy, we do a lot of good work and a lot of positive engagement with landowners and estate workers, and they're very much part of our implementation plan in dealing with wildfires in regard to that. So they help us with equipment and they help us with things that we need to put fire breaks in. So they're well aware of our wildfire strategy and they're well aware of the risks posed when they're doing backburn, heather burning and the like. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add to that, Mike.
Yeah, just that the equipment that the Ayleth and Pitlochry will be getting, Pitlochry will be a tier 3, so they'll have an all-terrain vehicle, fogging units, leaf blowers, radio repeater units, which is quite important for being up in the hills and using communication systems. So they'll be deployed along with Ayleth when there's a wildfire incident in the area. But as Scott said, all stations are trained to a level that they could do an initial attack, and they'll be supplemented with the additional resources from Ayleth and Pitlochry.
In addition to that, Councillor Braun, sorry, I'm back in again. Just interestingly, pre-agenda, something we mentioned and spoke about fire breaks, etc. So prior to coming today, we did do a bit of background work into wildfires and the potential risks, having seen what we've seen down in London and the likes into gardens. And there is actually no legislation about external fire risks to properties in this country. Some European countries have legislation in place in regard to, for example, crops growing next to back gardens, etc. But in this country, there's nothing like that in place. So no, that was just an additional point to bring in. Thank you.
Can I just follow up? The other part of the question was whether you actually speak to landowners and farmers to give them advice when they do burn to stop this spreading.
Sorry, Councillor Braun. Yes, yeah. So, as mentioned, yes, part of our wildfire strategy that involves work with landowners and estates in regard to putting in fire breaks and before they start burning, and having plans in place should it get out of control, and making sure they're informing us when they're doing any of that. But we do work very closely with both estates and workers in those areas. Yeah.
Thanks, Convener.
Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Duff, I'm from the Highland Ward, and I'm conscious that we obviously have a number of retained crews in our area and probably other rural areas within Perth and Kinross. I just wondered what the situation was at the moment with regards to recruitment of firefighters in your retained service and its impact on the availability of appliances. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Duff. So we're on a constant campaign, I would say, first and foremost, to try and recruit members into our on-call side of the service. And I suppose the important thing I would say to members from that is I would encourage you, when you're speaking to your constituents, to encourage them to think about it as a role within the community to help. We'll have a couple of areas where we're still short across Perth and Kinross, but I'll bring Mike in a minute in regard to areas that we're actively recruiting in at the moment. What we do in addition to that is we look across the whole of Perth and Kinross. Our operations control keep a track of the local availability in all our areas, and if there's any areas that show a lack of availability across that area, then what we can do is we can put day-related staff up to standby and make up those crews and make that availability, or we can put standby appliances up to those areas to make sure that we've got fire cover. So we'll always make sure that we've got fire cover covering the whole area in regard to that. And a bit more specific, Mike, into the recruitment across the area at the moment.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so across Highland area, one station in particular has been struggling for recruitment, but that is being addressed at present. We have 2 people in the process for joining the station, and recently we put together a specific recruitment video utilising some of the staff from across South Perthshire pertaining to recruitment for our on-call, which has been distributed on social media. Across Perth and Kinross per se, stations are actively recruiting. Across the country, we've actually had a new recruitment team initiated with fresh recruitment banners and literature to be distributed to fire stations for handing out. And they're always actively encouraging and being proactive to recruit within their areas. And as Scott has said, if you are out engaging with your constituents, encourage them to maybe look into joining the on-call firefighters and boosting their station numbers.
Thank you for that response, and maybe if there are any journalists listening in, we'll take the opportunity to highlight that to the public as well. Thank you.
I have a further 2 councillors want to ask questions, and after that we'll move to comments. Actually, we have one. So Councillor Leishman, you have the last question.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you very much for the report as well, gents. Could you tell us a little more about the 3-year modern apprenticeship and how trainee firefighters are assessed, please?
I'll start and then I'll bow down to Mike's probably greater experience in the modern apprenticeship. But my knowledge is that on point of entry, come in, and it's the 3-year apprenticeship where you do your red. We do annual assessments through a red, amber, green phase prior to becoming fully competent. But I think I'll just hand over to Mike and let him explain it. He's been involved in it more than me.
I'll try and keep it brief because it could go a long-winded answer, so I'll try and keep it specific. So as Scott says, when new trainees start, they'll go to Cambuslang or one of the training venues, do their course, they'll come back onto a watch, and so there's a specific training module you follow, so it's called the Training for Operational Competence. So there's specific modules you need to do for training per quarter. It used to be every month, but they've changed it to every quarter because it's easier to manage. And with that, the trainees will carry out a specific module per quarter. They will be involved in Q&A for that, so they need to go away and read up on certain policies, procedures, for the service, and then there'll be interspersed with some practical training as well. That will then be assessed over a period of time. As Scott says, they build up to what's called a red, amber and green phase assessment. So your red phase is after a year in service, your amber is after 2 years, and your third year is your green. And once you've completed your green phase, you're fully qualified in the role of being a firefighter. The modern apprenticeship side of things, they get reviewed regularly, and information sent off to the SQA once they completed each stage of the phases, and after the 3 years they get the qualification, firefighting in the community. And that is the brief overview of the modern apprenticeship SQA for firefighters. If you've got any further questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you very much. I realise that there was a much more in-depth answer available. We could be in here all day for that. So no, thanks very much for that brief one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any comments on the paper?
Convener, can I just at the start, I would just like to put on record, I was going to do it prior to introducing the report, just a thanks to Group Commander Ewan Baird, who's served as the Group Commander for Perth and Kinross for the last few years, who retired from the service last week, and just thank him for his contribution over the years. Thank you.
Thank you for that. With your sound issues, you probably missed my introduction to the paper, which did likewise. But thank you very much for adding that. Can we move the report? Great. Next we'll move on to item 2, which is the Perth and Kinross Local Policing Area Quarterly Report for April to June. Can I ask Chief Superintendent Davison and Area Commander Tom Leonard to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, everybody. Good to be here again. And for information, as you've just mentioned there, I am joined by Chief Inspector Leonard this morning. In terms of the policing report, this one covers Q1 reporting period, as you're aware, 1st of April 22 to the 30th of June 22, and is measured against the comparable period in the previous year and also against the 5-year average. The report provides performance update and contextual information against both the local policing plan, but also shows linkages into national policing objectives, as well as supporting the Perth and Kinross community plan. And as per the previous quarter, I think it's right to advise members that the impact of the coronavirus pandemic in previous years does continue to make year-on-year comparisons challenging due to the varying levels of restrictions that have been in place at different times. And that's relayed to in some of the commentary throughout the report. I trust members have had the opportunity to read the report, and on which we certainly wouldn't intend to go over the full submission. However, to provide a brief summary of the key points within the report, I'll pass over to Chief Inspector Leonard, and following that we'll both be more than happy as always to take any questions between us.
Good morning, everybody. I trust you will have all had the opportunity to review the performance report for Q1. The summary page at the start of our report provides an overview of our performance. However, I'll now provide some further contextual information, and as the Chief Superintendent says, after that we'll be more than happy to answer any questions. To start off with, in terms of violent crime, we've seen a welcome reduction in the number of serious assaults, with 6 fewer crimes being recorded when compared with the same period last year. Detection rates for serious assaults are lower than in previous years. However, a number of these crimes remain under active investigation, with oversight being provided by a newly appointed detective inspector based in Perth and Kinross as part of our revised locality CID model. Common assaults have seen a slight increase when compared with the previous year. However, we've also seen a rise in detection rates, which now sit above both the divisional and national averages. As with previous reporting periods, domestic abuse offences account for more than a third of all recorded common assaults, with a significant proportion being non-recent in nature, and that is that while the crime was recorded during the reporting period, it actually occurred more than 12 months prior to being reported to the police. While this can present challenges to our investigations, we actively encourage reporting in non-recent offences, and we routinely proactively seek out reporting of these offences as part of our investigative strategy to target and disrupt repeat and prolific offenders, not just in terms of violence, but across all different types of crime. Alcohol and substance misuse remains an underlying factor in a significant proportion of violent crime, and we continue to work with partners to ensure that victims are signposted to relevant support and that every opportunity is taken to divert or disrupt the perpetrator's offending behaviour. Moving on to acquisitive crime, the quarter saw an increased occurrence rates across all areas of acquisitive crime, with housebreaking to domestic dwellings showing the sharpest increase, with the number of crimes recorded rising from 13 to 25. This rise means that the occurrence rate is currently higher than the 5-year average. However, as the Chief Superintendent alluded to, we're aware that these figures have been affected by lower levels of recorded crime during periods of COVID lockdown, when more members of the public remained at home and opportunities to commit these types of offences were reduced. That said, we recognise the impact that crimes of this nature can have on victims, and housebreaking remains a priority area of investigation, with all reports of housebreaking being subject of a review by locality CID at the time of reporting. A number of these crimes remain under active investigation, and it's anticipated that our performance in this area will improve as these investigations are brought to conclusion. We've also seen a rise in vehicle crime, mainly relating to the theft or attempted theft of items from vehicles. The majority of these offences are attributable to a small number of prolific offenders. As with domestic housebreaking, a response to vehicle crime is overseen by our locality CID, and within the report we've outlined some of the investigations that have been completed into crime series that we saw in the Perth area during Q1, which resulted in 3 Perth-based males being arrested for a total of 35 offences committed across the city. Moving on to road safety and road crime, Perth and Kinross tragically recorded 1 adult fatality in June when a 69-year-old female was struck by a vehicle near the Kinlochrannoch. Serious injuries have reduced, with 5 fewer persons seriously injured when compared to the same period last year, and the quarter has also seen a marked reduction in speeding offences and cases of careless driving and drink and drug driving. These reductions are welcome and are in line with trends that we see in other areas of the division. But while the reductions are positive, we're not complacent, and our roads policing colleagues continue to proactively patrol priority routes, with the number of vehicles stopped during the reporting period only marginally lower than that in the previous year. Moving on to public protection, in relation to domestic abuse, we've seen a small rise in the number of offences recorded under the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act. Detection rates for these offences have also risen and are now broadly in line with divisional average. We continue to work with partners to support victims and to proactively target perpetrators, and our report contains a number of examples of significant court sentences which were achieved following referrals to the multi-agency MATAC process. We've seen a reduction in the level of recorded hate crime, with 3 fewer crimes recorded than during the same period last year, and remain conscious of the fact that these figures only represent those crimes reported to the police, and there is a potential that they're still under reporting. So we continue to work with partners to encourage reporting of hate crime and to develop our response. We continue to see a rise in sexual crime, a trend which is reflected both divisionally and nationally, however have seen a reduction in the occurrence rate for rape and attempted rape. Detection rates for sexual offences are lower than previous years. However, as with other areas, a number of these offences remain under active investigation, both by specialist local and national policing teams. And again, it's anticipated that our performance will improve as these protracted investigations are brought to a conclusion. Finally, in relation to serious and organised crime, we've seen reductions in the level of crimes recorded for drug possession and supply, a trend again which is replicated across the division. Detection rates have increased, and we continue to target those involved in the supply of controlled drugs via our newly formed serious and organised crime team. Our report highlights recent enforcement activity in Perth carried out by the team, which resulted in recoveries of both cash and drugs, and the arrest of a male who is now remanded in custody awaiting trial. Chief Superintendent Davison and I will now be happy to answer any questions you may have in relation to the report.
Thank you very much, Tom. The first question we have is from Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to Chief Superintendent Davison and Chief Inspector Leonard for your report. It is good news to read that speeding offences across the region have significantly decreased, but I have had several conversations with residents from Perth City North regarding excessive speed across the ward, namely in Fuse Road, Rannoch Road, West Mains Avenue and the Creef Road. I'm under the impression that speed limit enforcement is more likely to be practiced on open roads where it's statistically more likely for fatalities to occur. However, there is a problem with excessive speed in urban areas, and not only in the streets I've just mentioned. Is it possible for Police Scotland to invest greater resources in enforcing speed limits in the more residential areas in Perth and Kinross?
Councillor Leishman, thanks very much for the question, and one that I would certainly be able to respond to. So, our Police Scotland and multi-agency road safety strategy is very much focused on clearly reducing casualties as a primary, and because of that, the enforcement activity will predominantly take place on areas where there is the identification of the greatest risk taking place, and clearly to have that focus on reducing casualties and instances. We use and take information and data from a range of sources to determine where the focus of activity will take place, and often that does lead to the greater used roads, the more main trunk roads being those that get the primary focus. What I would say though, and I would certainly suggest for that ask back into communities, is that we very much listen to communities, and I would ask for that continued reporting in if there are fears and concerns in urban areas or A road, B road areas, that there's a feel around about speeding. We will certainly take that on board in the round of information, and there are a number of approaches that can be taken to clearly take effect in those areas, and those tactical options range from deployment of the pop-up bob as a deterrent, looking and working with partners around about speed control measures, looking at speed monitoring equipment, which we see in many areas that often come in response to community concerns, by deployment of community speed watch, and clearly where that data starts to pick up and suggest that there is a problem, then we can focus the heavier end of our enforcement activity into these areas. So it's I guess that reassurance. It's not to say in any way we are not focusing on urban areas. It's that it's a prioritization, needs to go to the areas and the roads of greatest risk, which I would hope would be appreciated, but certainly really keen to hear from and listen to and factor into the decision making on deployments of any areas of concern.
Thanks very much for your reply. I'll pass it on to local residents as well, because it has been something that's came up in conversation. So thanks very much for your time.
I suppose on the back of that, Commander Davison, do you feel that the penalty notices that your officer can hand out for speeding offences are too affordable, and therefore people do not take the actual penalty seriously enough, especially within the 40 and below speed limits? Because these are the areas where harm to individuals is much more likely.
Convener, thanks for the subsequent question. I think the dangers on our roads, and clearly the priority activity that we apply to them, as seen in this report, is having a positive effect. Only a marginal number of less vehicles stopped in this period comparative to last year, but quite a significant number of reductions in terms of the number of offences detected, which is indicative of road users paying heed to the various awareness raising messages, enforcement activities, and other measures to reduce offences, clearly having effect. In terms of the punitive layers, that there are clearly a range of options where offences are detected, and these do range from a lower level fine through to the totting up points system, and the full reporting of offenders that breach speeds excessively or are repeat offenders, where a fine option is then not available and it goes to a full report to the Crown Office of Procurator Fiscal Service. The setting of the fine level doesn't, to my understanding, rest with the police, and I suppose it's not necessarily appropriate for me to have a personal comment on that, but I trust that bit of explanation around about those range of measures and options, and that certainly those that flaunt the law at the most serious end of the scale get an additional, or an enhanced means of putting that through into the justice system rather than a ticket option, so to speak.
Thank you very much for being as candid as you can be on that. Next question from Councillor Allen.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. There is a stark reduction in the incidence of speeding in the report, and I recognise that 71%, that could be looked as a good thing, or it could be looked at that we're perhaps not picking up on many of the people who are speeding. As a regular user of the A9 between Dunblane and Perth, I see from your report that you're suggesting that a number of average speed cameras have been removed. And I'm just really trying to get an understanding now. Has the removal of those cameras led to a lack of detection? Is there no detection? Are they just being used as a deterrent? That's the question. Thank you.
Councillor, thanks again for that question, and I might bring in Chief Inspector Leonard in a second, but whilst the volume of roadworks have clearly been ongoing on that stretch of road, there clearly has been a period where the cameras have been pulled, but that has not stopped the proactivity in the area with road policing deployments. Clearly on that main road, it's a road that does pose concern along its full stretch. So there's certainly been that retention of policing presence in the area. The reduction in speeding, offences that have come through is not through a lack of number of vehicles stopped and proactive activity. So we are trying to examine why that drop has taken place, and that there may be a number of reasons for it, particularly when we look at the comparative periods over a couple of years, where the profile of vehicle users, for example, last year will have been different to this year. There was a lot more visitors through the area, unfamiliar with the local roads, for example, last year, whereas we've reopened out to foreign holidays and greater local usage of the roads again this year, with return to normal working environments and other things. That may have an impact factor, but certainly, what we've clearly noticed is that on average, and as is seen by those speeding offences having been reduced, is that the behaviour of drivers seems to be being heeded to, and that's not just across Perth and Kinross, it's on that wider basis across Tayside.
Thank you for that. Thanks.
Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. Before I go into the question, I was going to ask, if you don't mind, I'd like to follow up on a question that Councillor Leishman asked. And in your response to that, you mentioned Community Speed Watch. Is that still a thing that Police Scotland support? And are there any active groups that you could perhaps tell us about?
Councillor, thanks for the question. So Community Speed Watch is something that Police Scotland supports. In terms of the specifics of local deployments, I'll maybe pass in to Chief Inspector Leonard if he's got that information available, and if not, we will certainly get that to you around about the locality specific ones. Chief Inspector Leonard.
Yeah, understand, just going back to Councillor Leishman's original point as well, that speeding remains a concern across Perthshire, and just to provide some reassurance in addition to the priority routes that are highlighted in our report, our road policing colleagues have supported us with carrying out speed checks in other areas within Perth City itself recently, so we can move that resource and flex that support into areas where there's identified need or vulnerability. So I would say if there are concerns, then please either directly into myself or via your locality inspectors and community policing teams make us aware of that, and where we have that information we can look at how we respond to that. In terms of community speed watch, there are active community speed watches. I don't have the details immediately to hand as to where they are throughout Perth and Kinross at the moment, but can provide that. There is a process that has to be undertaken in terms of community speed watch before we deploy, which surrounds risk assessment, etc., and appropriate training to make sure that people can take part in that activity safely. But it's something that if there is a need in the community, then again, I would encourage you to get in touch, and through our community policing teams, we can look at supporting that.
That's great, thanks. I don't need you to spend time getting back to me on the specifics. I was really just interested to know that you still support it as an organisation. My question was about serious organised crime, drug supply and drug possession. It's great to see them coming down, particularly drug possession. Is that because you've had an active role in making that happen, or is it just a change in circumstances in our area?
I'll maybe bring Chief Inspector Leonard in for a specific local context, but the reductions that are seen in the Perth and Kinross report are reflective across the other areas in Tayside as well. It's certainly not through any lack of proactivity. We still receive really helpful information and intelligence from our communities, and I'm really grateful for that. I would encourage our communities to continue to supply and provide any information and concerns they have around about local criminals or wider criminal base, and we will always look to assess and act upon that information. We've had some really positive enforcement activities over the period, and I think the concerted effort both nationally, locally and with multi-agency partners in respect of tackling issues concerned around about drugs and drugs supply is having a positive effect. So in terms of the local basis, Chief Inspector Leonard, I don't know if there's anything additional you would wish to add with that local context.
Yeah, I think we've had really strong partnership working here in Perth and Kinross in terms of our response to drugs. Perth and Kinross suffers from the blight of drug supply and addiction, much like any other area across the country. However, the work that we do locally, feeding information that comes in from local areas into the drugs targeting meeting, and some of that focused activity that we've highlighted in our report to target those who are involved in the supply chain is proven particularly successful, with one particular example highlighted in our report. But again, we remain alert to the fact that this is a continuing issue for us, so we would continue to ask people to provide that information regarding any concerns that they've got regarding activity within their community. We do have the revised locality CID model, which enhances our response to drugs supply. However, in addition to that, divisionally, we now have the serious and organised crime team who bring additional expertise to bear and who can provide further support. So it's something that we continue to monitor. We aren't complacent despite the decreases in some of the figures, and continue to see it as a priority area for us to address.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener. A couple of years ago, Divisional Commander Andrew Todd directed the committee to the Police Scotland website, which publishes data on the stop and search. I think that was in response to questions about potential disproportionate use of stop and search. And I think that also resulted in the incorporation of the reassurance statements that we have in the report now. I looked at that report, and whilst the performance in terms of issuing receipts for stop and search in both Perth and Kinross and Dundee is better than the Scottish average, in Perth and Kinross there's something like 20% of stop and searches where a receipt isn't issued. In Dundee, I think it's about 15%, and in Scotland it's about 25%. 20% still seemed like quite a high proportion where a receipt wasn't issued to me, and I wondered whether there was any improvement target set for this year, or anything being done locally to improve the issuing of receipts for stop and searches.
Councillor, I'll maybe take that, and thank you very much for the question. Clearly, the governance of stop and search is really important to the organisation. It's a tactic that rightly requires scrutiny from national level right the way down to local level, and certainly happy to support this local scrutiny committee with any further additional information that's required. In terms of how we look to assess the data, you know, primarily focus around about the measures of equality, making sure that our stop and search activity is focused in the right areas with correct cause and application, and that I think is reflected positively in terms of the positivity rate that we see from stop and search activity. Which is and tracks relatively high. In terms of the governance, and I guess the point around about the 20% not being issued, it's not something I've had surfaced to me personally through those governance structures as yet, but I will take that away off table. What we do is look on a quarterly and 6 monthly basis through an assistant chief constable who has the lead around about stop and search nationally. That has divisional representation into that, but I haven't had any adverse concerns, I suppose, flagged into me, but I'll chase that up and clearly look at that and can come back to you separately.
Thank you very much.
I have 3 more councillors wishing to ask questions, and after that I'll move to comments. So, Councillor Braun.
I have 3 questions. Is that all right? I mean, just but Councillor Barrett's already touched on the first one, and the only other part of that I was going to ask was, do we get many complaints from people about stop and search? Do you register any complaints on it?
Councillor Braun, I'll certainly answer that one straight off, and we've got the complaints about the police section in the report where members will hopefully note a reduction on the previous year and certainly against the 5-year average, and equally we regularly look at and take account of the Your Police survey data, which asks numerous questions around about policing activity and responses, and we do generally track quite positively in that regard. So in terms of specific complaints around about stop and search, there are and will be some across the country, but there are not any identified trends or issues in respect of that for Tayside. That answers the question for you.
Thank you. Second question relates to police numbers. My colleague, Councillor Hearn, was out on shift with the community officers in Perth just last week, I believe. And there were 4 officers, of which 2 were called away almost immediately to support officers in Dundee. So the question is really, how are we situated with police numbers? I've read in the paper recently that Police Scotland were going to lose around 700 this year. How are we fixing this division for numbers?
I'm sure members across the table will have seen a variety of releases, and certainly the Chief Constable having mentioned at the SPA board live in previous week that as a consequence of changes to pensions, and as a consequence of the period of pandemic in COP26, there has been a greater than anticipated take-up of retirements for officers this year, comparative to the scale of recruitment that's coming in, and that certainly has led to a gap that isn't ordinarily seen or anticipated across the organisation. In response to that, there has been a number of measures put in place nationally, real increased focus in the recruitment arena. We've currently 300 plus probationers at Tullyallen currently, on the back of 300 in the course prior to that, and another 300 or thereabouts about to start. Tayside as an area and into Perth and Kinross gets its proportionate allocation of those probationer numbers, and we continue to clearly track the resourcing picture closely. There are a number of additional measures that members would expect to see where we've got that national challenge and slight gap in relation to resources, and that's around about the benefit of flexibility that being a national organisation affords us, and that chance that we can forward plan, we can look at areas where we see resource challenges coming towards us and being able to utilise and tap into those national assets. So examples of that would be the policing of events, for example, St Johnstone Games in the area, where our national serious specialist crime division, national operations support division and corporate services departments assist with the supply and provision of officers to support frontline services. And we look to that flexibility on a regular basis to ensure that frontline services remain as unaffected as possible. In relation to the specific date in question that you've referenced there, policing by its very nature has to respond on the basis of risk, and the reality of that instance last week is that there was a very serious incident that occurred in Dundee, and that required a prioritisation and a flexibility to focus police resources on that most serious matter at that particular point in time. And clearly Perth and Kinross will and does receive the benefit reciprocally where there are incidents of concern in our area, with support from Dundee and other neighbouring policing areas as required. I'd maybe just use the opportunity. The fire service spoke about retained officers, but we also look at and seek to use our special constables. Tayside has always enjoyed the benefit of volunteers, and aside seeking to encourage local people to apply for a career in policing, because it is a really rewarding occupation, to also seek to encourage volunteers to come into our special constabulary ranks, because it is undoubtedly a rewarding occupation in the service of communities. I don't know, Chief Inspector Leonard, anything additional you wish to add on that local basis?
No, I just echo your comments. I think in relation to the community teams, then Councillor Ahern, it was Dave Summers' team in Perth community that you were out with. You'll be aware that we have been actively recruiting to fill vacancies within the community policing teams across Perth and Kinross. So I would expect to see an uplift in the numbers within the community policing teams as people start to take up those positions, having transitioned from other areas of the LPA. I would just echo the Commander's comments regarding specials. We have a number of specials within Perth and Kinross who work tirelessly to support policing within their local communities, and in the last week or so we've just issued certificates of commendation for special constables who've completed in the region of 600, 700 hours service to their communities in the year, so are really vital to support the local policing. And having been a special constable myself, I would echo the comments. It's a really rewarding role to do and a good introduction to policing in general. So again, as with retained firefighters, if we have the opportunity to speak to your constituents and just promote that, then the information in terms of recruitment is on the Police Scotland website.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. One more question, if I may, Convener. It really comes down to something we never see in the report, and it comes down to assaults on police officers. Do we have a number of officers, or what sort of number of officers are assaulted within the division? I was going to say serious, but I would put across the point that all are serious, I'm sure. So is that something we suffer from?
Maybe take that question on that broader basis, Councillor. So no emergency service worker, whether police, ambulance, fire or others, should expect to come to their work and be assaulted. We have seen an unfortunate trend over recent years of increases in the reports of assaults on emergency service workers, and whilst they're minimal against ambulance service, fire service and others, the primary grouping tends to unfortunately be police officers. The circumstances of each individual assault against an officer is reviewed at the back of an occurrence. We know that occurrences happen both pre-arrest in very spontaneous circumstances where officers are in attendance at a call and would not necessarily expect to be subject to assault, very spontaneous. During arrest, so that's that reaction to having been placed under arrest, and then post-arrest into the custody setting. Alcohol and drugs are very much often a factor, and as an organisation, clearly it's an area of significant concern with us. So we've a number of work streams that are ongoing relative to this, that relates to reviewing the equipment, the officer safety equipment that our teams have, reviewing the training and lessons that can be learned from each and every assault that takes place, so that we can better train and equip, raising awareness clearly in communities and understanding the risk profile of particular offenders, and positively working with justice partners so that we can seek as positive court outcomes as possible. I trust that helps to answer your question, Councillor Braun.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Last question, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, officers, for the report. I was just seeking additional information on page 44 under the heading Serious Assault. The report states that prison releases are monitored and locality officers carry out proactive visits to discourage reoffending and ensure any support required is highlighted via the Preventions, Interventions and Partnerships team. I was just wondering, two questions there is, for how long does a monitoring process typically last? And approximately how many visits are undertaken during that monitoring period for an ex-offender? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll maybe go straight to Chief Inspector Leonard on that one, who clearly oversees that monitoring. He can give you that context and answer.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor McPherson. It very much depends on the circumstances of the person's release, whether they're subject to any conditions, but we recognise that there is a significant risk. So we talked in the report about the acquisitive crime series, where we have a number of offenders who are identified for a large number of crimes. So as part of our investigation into that, we identify perpetrators, arrest them and put them to the court, so they can either be released from the court or released from prison after a period of sentence. That risk remains until full conviction and sentencing, and potentially a longer period of imprisonment. So we have a number of processes in place locally to identify those perpetrators who we perceive pose a risk to the community, either through their offending behaviour in terms of acquisitive crime or violent crime. And there's a number of processes, as I say, to manage that. And that can range from management of bail conditions. So for domestic perpetrators, we have a process where we work with partners to review the risk posed by perpetrators, and there's a prescribed number of visits that we are required to carry out as a minimum. However, everything is risk assessed, so if those visits require to be continued or expanded in any way, then we will continue to do that. The success of that is probably highlighted in the report, and that one of the individuals who was arrested originally for a series of vehicle crimes in the Perth city area was released with bail conditions, and those bail conditions were actively managed by us, which resulted in a number of checks being carried out, which identified at a fairly early point that he was breaching those conditions, which allowed us then to return him to custody, where he remains awaiting trial. So there are a number of different management processes that are in place depending on the offence and the type of offender. It is also required not just to manage those conditions, but also to look at perhaps other underlying reasons for the offending behaviour. So we do work very closely with partners throughout Perth and Kinross to address any vulnerabilities and signpost perpetrators to any support that they require in order to break that offending cycle.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We now move to comments, and first is Councillor Barrett.
Thanks very much, Convener, and I want to thank Chief Inspector Tom Leonard and his colleague Graham Binney and Sergeant Lee Stewart for their positive engagement with regard to concerns that I raised about hate crime at the previous committee, and for the actions that are contained within this report, which kind of refocus the police attention, as well as that of our Equalities and Community Safety team, on how we can tackle and improve the response to hate crime in Perth and Kinross, and particularly around the actions to increase awareness, to improve third-party reporting, and for better engagement with the equalities and minorities groups locally, and in terms of communication, building communications around the equalities calendar moving forward. So I think it's a really good example of how we can work together to tackle concerns about hate crime in our area, and I want to thank the police for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor James.
Thanks very much, Convener. And mine's my comments pretty much similar to Councillor Barrett's. Just to say thanks, really. I mean, the report's great. You're having to report on things that, in all honesty, doesn't affect anybody's day-to-day living, but you have to report on them, and it's time that you don't spend as policing, if you like. So credit where credit's due. You're also quite often barracked for not answering 101. I have to say, twice in the last month I've called 101 and I've had a response and had the police actually turn up within 20 minutes or so. So you do provide a great service, and I thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Forbes.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I kind of want to echo what's been said. I want to thank all of the police officers, not just the two with us today, for the work that they do across our communities. I suspect it's an absolutely thankless task, and grateful for the work that all your officers do. Slightly concerned about recruitment. I see almost every day on Facebook and other social media paid for adverts by Police Scotland looking for recruits. That would suggest to me there is an issue with recruitment. I think one of you alluded to people taking early retirement. Imagine, because of the grief that you all get on a day-to-day basis, that's not at all surprising. I was absolutely horrified to read in the paper an officer, I think, in either Forth or Brechin recently, who was very badly assaulted, had considerable amount of time off work, and the perpetrator received a non-custodial sentence. I know you can't comment on that, I wouldn't expect you to, but I thought that was absolutely horrific. So thanks for the work that all of you do across our communities.
Thank you very much. Can we move the report? Agreed, agreed. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We move on to item 6 on our agenda, which is a presentation on the cost of living crisis. I think everybody will agree that this is the most important thing currently to our constituents and to the concerns of ourselves as councillors. And I hope that this briefing will go some way to move forward what we can do as a council, working together with communities and with local businesses to help our constituents as much as we can as things move forward. Claire Miller is going to present the presentation.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. So I've got a short presentation and we'll give an overview of where we are in Perth and Kinross. The cost of living crisis is obviously at the forefront of everybody's minds and indeed hearts, and has been for some time. So we'll give a brief overview of where we are locally and some of the actions that we're undertaking and planning to take. I would stress before I start, as you will all be well aware, the information that I've got in this presentation was accurate at the time that it was pulled together a few days ago, but it is a daily changing situation, and therefore the figures and indeed some of the information is already out of date given some of the recent announcements. So we will continue to update on a regular basis. I've got with me colleagues from across the council. Carol Henry, I can see you're back there on the screen, so we'll be able to answer any questions. Lynn and Nick are here from Welfare Rights, and Paul and Margaret are also here who are involved in the child poverty and indeed this work here. So no one could have anticipated the challenges that everyone is facing, emerging from a global pandemic and now pitched into a cost of living crisis, which will put heating homes to an acceptable standard beyond the budgets of large sections of our population. The cost of food, fuel and energy has risen significantly, and further increases are anticipated, with energy bills forecast to rise to over £6,500 by April next year. Notwithstanding the many mitigation measures that have been put in place, many families will face a very difficult winter this year. Next slide, please, Audrey. So the cost of living crisis, here's some headline figures, but there are many more. The cost of living has been increasing across the UK since early 2021. Consumer prices were 9.4% higher in June 22 than a year before. Food inflation was 9.8% higher in June this year than a year before, and food prices have risen disproportionately for people who buy basic foods. The price of petrol saw its biggest daily jump in 17 years on the 7th of June, costing on average £99 to fill a tank of petrol. The cost of living crisis is expected to see essential family spending increase by £56.89 per week. And as we know, the energy price caps are expected to push inflation and continue to push inflation to high levels. The average household in Perth and Kinross will see their annual budget stretched by £2,958 just for essentials like heating their home, putting food on the table, taking the bus to work, having use of a mobile phone and broadband at home, and paying for household goods and services, clothing and footwear. For many families who are struggling to make ends meet, this is an impossible hill to climb. So here in Perth and Kinross, and as I say, some of the figures here are out of date very quickly, and some of these are very much kind of some previous figures. So 18% of families we know have no savings, no fallback position, and we actually estimate that the figure will be significantly higher than that. It is a low-paid economy with a significant and widening pay gap to the rest of Scotland here in Perth and Kinross. 16.5% of our workforce earn less than the living wage of £9.50 an hour, and 24,000 in our population are in low-paid work. The pay gap with the rest of Scotland widened to £47.10 a week from £11.90 in 2019 and £24 in 2020. We have a significant gender pay gap at £228.50 for all workers and £140 for full-time workers. And sadly, we top the league table for the employment rate gap between men and women. Next slide, please, Audrey. There are many households, everybody's going to be impacted by the cost of living, but there are many households that will be particularly vulnerable. Families without recourse to public funds, lone parent families headed by a woman, families with a disabled family member, large families, Black, Asian and minority families, families with a mother under the age of 21, families with a child under 1 year old. So a good number of groups. And the next slide gives some more. People on the cusp of qualifying for a passported means tested benefit, people on benefits and pensioners. Private renters are particularly vulnerable. They're on lower incomes, they tend to live in homes with poorer energy efficiency, and they pay significantly higher rents than social tenants. So the announcements made yesterday regarding rent freezes and the ban on evictions will be welcomed by many tenants. Anyone with less disposable income is likely to be more vulnerable, and people on low incomes who need to run hospital equipment at home, for example, dialysis machines, hydraulic beds, etc., have more energy costs and are more vulnerable. Now, you're not going to be able to see this information fairly significantly. We will share the slides with you, and we've got more detailed information. We have been modelling, and you know, many of you like these slides and the way that these are presented. So we've got some other family groups that we can share with you. We continue to model the effects of the current crisis on a number of different family groups. We've got a couple shown here on the slide. A full set of these will be circulated following the briefing. But basically what this is telling us is, in many cases, essential spend exceeds income, and just demonstrates the sort of I suppose the income expenditure challenges that many of our households are facing. But we will share this more detailed information with you following today's session. The next slide gives an overview, which many of you will be aware of the many government mitigation actions. I won't go through them all in detail. Money off energy bills, payments for households receiving benefits, 5p cut in fuel duty, council tax support to many households, 10 million towards the Food Insecurity Fund, an increase to the Scottish Child Payment to £20 in April, and we heard yesterday a further increase to £25 in November, further to be extended to £35 per week, and all under 16s by the end of this year. So lots of updates that we'll need to undertake following recent and indeed announcements that we anticipate later today or indeed later this week. The next slide gives an overview of some of our local position, areas where we are really working to influence and support. In Perth and Kinross, we've had a 10% reduction in school meals debt in year since May for the current pupil-related debt. And this gives an idea of some of the work and the targeted work that the teams are doing. As a result of concerns surrounding school meals debt, the Welfare Rights team proactively contacted all households with child-related debts, so school meals, breakfast clubs, after-school clubs, to offer financial advice and financial insecurity assistance. Many households with school dinner debts were assisted to the value at that point of almost 17,000. This advice was broadened out beyond school meals to advice covering other debts such as rent arrears, council tax, broadband and indeed fuel. So a good indicator for the teams there. We've had a 6% increase in terms of money owed to the council in rent arrears, a marginal increase in the number of tenants actually in arrears. Council tax does remain relatively static at the moment, but again, this is for us a really good indicator of where financial pressures are starting to creep in, and good for us in terms of stepping in to provide some direct targeted support. The next slide gives an overview of some of the challenges that many of our frontline services, not just within the council, but across many of the third sector and indeed other partners. Citizens Advice have reported a 40% increase in contacts and benefit caseloads rising by 22%, debt caseload increasing by 40%, but most worrying of all is the 262% increase in utilities debt caseload. Our Welfare Rights team have reported a 64% increase in contacts compared to May of last year, all of which were benefit related. 24% increase in crisis fund grant applications compared with pre-pandemic figures. The team were currently processing around 300 applications for the Financial Insecurity Fund. I've no doubt that figure is higher. A 15% increase in application for school clothing grants. However, applications for free school meals have trebled since 2018-19. So that really gives you a bit of an idea in terms of the demands for our frontline services. And speaking with many staff on the front line, you can see they've obviously spent 2 years really supporting some of our most vulnerable households and communities throughout the pandemic, and now really in terms of frontline staff being sort of forced into huge demands on their on each of them to really support our households. The next slide gives an overview on many of the funding that the council has already committed. I would have to say that's been fairly significant. You can see there, and you'll be aware of it through various committees and discussions. So a fairly significant offer from the council, 1.6 million, but lots of other measures that are underway. Cost of living, poverty, addressing poverty threads through all of the work that we do across the whole council, and indeed with many of our sort of third sector and indeed community planning partners. So there's lots of other activity that is underway as well. Other measures of spend include significant spend on home energy efficiency measures, triple glazing, central heating, internal and external wall installations. A fuel poverty steering group's been established involving representatives from across the council, our community planning partners and indeed energy suppliers. A Cold Homes app has been commissioned to enable our frontline workers to provide energy advice to tenants and indeed residents. So lots of work that's underway there. The next slide gives an overview in terms of the view from the community. I won't go through those, you can probably read them, but we have established sentinel reporting from community organisations closest to those who are vulnerable. It's really important that we understand how people are experiencing the cost of living crisis so that we can target and direct our support in the most appropriate ways. So organisations have been asked to report on trends around requests for help, presenting issues and to provide us with some case studies. And this information, as I say, really helps us to develop our understanding. So we've got lots of the stats, but the lived experience and the voices of individual households and communities are absolutely key for us in terms of ensuring an appropriate response. So next slide just gives a bit of a flavour of some of the work that we're doing. We've established a winter response plan. Lynn, who's on the call, is heading up the group there. This is very much a partnership approach. Activity and support will be coordinated at a ward locality level, including all relevant parties. David has been in touch here. We've been in touch with all community groups, or are getting in touch with all community groups as we speak, third sector organisations and partners, to establish and map their plans for support in terms of cosy spaces and identify any gaps and further assistance needed. And I think some recent feedback from David has been many of the groups are just sort of finding increased demand for services and provisions that are already available, which is, you know, understandable and indeed, you know, I think really, really positive. We're coordinating all food and fuel activity, identifying some future and indeed immediate resource requirements. We're pulling together our incident response arrangements for severe weather. So when the weather becomes extremely difficult, we're ensuring that we're liaising with our emergency planning team and indeed partners across health and social care and more widely to ensure a coordinated and supportive response. The next slide gives a wee bit in terms of our comms and engagement plan. It's really important that we reach out to local residents, ensure that they know where they can go for help to maximise their income, conserve energy, reduce fuel consumption, and importantly, obtain access to free or low-cost food and indeed warm food, cosy spaces, warm home packs, etc. We will be doing the targeted work to ensure the support to our most vulnerable residents. We've got really good information. COVID pandemic has enabled us to reach out through welfare checks and wider work in terms of who we think our most vulnerable residents are. But again, partnership approach. Many of you have been in touch with us and no doubt will continue to do over the winter where you have got concerns. And again, as part of this awareness raising for staff and other key stakeholders. I would stress all of the work that we will do, we will ensure will be in a dignified and inclusive manner. We don't want any kind of stigmas attached to any of the work that we're doing. And I think that's why David's point about, you know, provisions and activities that are already underway, we will be encouraging more people to join these rather than kind of having any kind of, I suppose, stigma attached to any areas. The final slide that I've got here just gives an overview of some of the work. We're reaching out to other organisations and indeed employers to ensure that they've got support in place for their employees. The welfare rights team have been involved in that. We're also having conversations with large businesses and employees in terms of how they can support, and we've had some good support already. We'll continue our efforts to increase registration for free school meals, and we will monitor a suite of indicators of poverty and the impact of the cost of living to ensure that we understand the impact being felt across communities, and we can step up our response accordingly. That is a whistle-stop tour. There's probably lots more that's going on in terms of the action plan, but hopefully it gives you some reassurance and a flavour of the work that's been undertaken. We have got some elected member briefings planned later on this month, and as I say, we will be reaching out at a ward level. Some of you will have been at the briefing that we had last week. So happy to take, or the team and I would be happy to take any questions.
Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, convener. Thanks for that, Claire. I've got 3 kind of questions, points of that. Okay, and I'm going to preface them with the fact that this is my second time on this committee, so I suspect there's stuff that some people along the table from me will know offhand that I don't know. So apologies for that. Hope you don't mind me pointing this out to you, but there was a slide earlier on and it said something about vulnerable households, and you specifically said, I think you used the phrase led by a woman or something like that, and I'm wondering why you would consider a household with a woman at the head was more vulnerable than others. Sorry, I know I'm putting you on the spot. It just jumped right out at me, and I was wondering if there was a reason for it.
And if I can get my mic on, very much because you'll see within that slide as well the gender pay gap and access to better paid employment. So that's where that vulnerability sits in.
Thanks, Claire. That makes absolute sense. Appreciate that. The school meals stuff, I think at the briefing that you ran for us, which was really useful a couple of weeks ago, there was discussion about registration for school meals has gone up hugely, but I think there was a reason for that, and it was to allow people to make some kind of claim for another benefit. So I'm wondering if you've got any figures where school meal registration is shown beside school meal actual take-up, because I would guess while school meal registrations is going up, free school meal registration is going up the way, take-up is either flatlining or going down the way. And you may not have that to hand, and that's absolutely fine if you don't.
I don't have that to hand, but we will work with our education and children's services colleagues in terms of pulling that information together.
Councillor Ford, after the briefing we had last week, I raised that exact issue with Keith McNamara and the Education Service and Housing to look into the matter and see what the barriers are within the schools. And I think Councillor Rebick is well aware that it might not be an easy solution, but one that, as you've indicated, needs to be solved in one way or another to help support these families who should be getting the meals and encourage them to get them. With your first question, I have another officer who would like to answer the question as well, and then we can come to your third question. So it's for Carol Hendry to.
It's okay. I think Claire answered the question, and you've just answered the other one, so it's fine. Thank you.
So Councillor Forbes, your third question.
Thank you, Claire. You'll be pleased to know this is, I think, the last one at the moment anyway. You referenced the announcement from the Scottish Government yesterday about a freeze on rent, which you said would obviously be welcomed by tenants. Does that apply to social housing? It does, yeah, for council houses too. When would we I know there's quite a convoluted process about setting the rent, and I know that the tenants are involved in that process. When would rent be increased normally in the annual cycle?
We increase our rent at the beginning of the financial year, so that'll be the beginning of April. So work is underway with tenants at the moment to consult.
And yet I think the First Minister said yesterday that this was in place until the 31st of March. So does that mean it actually won't impact on our tenants at all?
At this stage, it's too early. We literally just heard the announcement yesterday, so obviously the Scottish Government will be kind of giving kind of more detailed outlines in terms of exactly what that means. So too hot off the press, I think, for us to give any kind of definitive answer in terms of the longer term implications at this stage.
That's great. Thanks very much, Claire, for those answers. Appreciate that.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you. It's just perhaps a follow on, it's perhaps not. And given the government rent freeze yesterday and the First Minister's announcement that there will be no evictions, I'm just wondering, if people can't afford to pay, will they not just stop paying because they know they're not going to be evicted? And if that is the case, and I'm sure it will be, do we need to start looking at that now and have a contingency plan of how we deal with the fallout? Because there's going to be a massive gap in budgets should that take place. Thank you.
Now, I may ask Elaine Ritchie to come in and answer this, but I mean, we've experienced similar problems or similar challenges throughout COVID in terms of people's ability to pay their rent. There was a moratorium on evictions at that time. Through the Private Landlord Forum, the housing team worked very, very closely with all private landlords and indeed private tenants to ensure, alongside our welfare rights team, take up of benefits and indeed assistance, so that at any point that the moratorium is lifted, we're well aware of who these tenants are and support is already in place. So there's a lot of preventative work that is undertaken by the teams across welfare rights and indeed the housing team.
I don't think I could add anything to that, but just to say the legislation's not been agreed yet, and that's been a point that's been raised by many local authorities, that point you just made. So it is an issue and we've all raised it. So we'll be interested to see if there's any amendment put in the legislation regarding that point. Thank you.
Thank you. And just as a furtherance, one of your mentions on one of your slides was warm places. I think we should start to look towards the local communities. They do have warm places, such as community halls and things like that, where people can go during the day to get some warmth and heat and perhaps even a cup of coffee. Thanks.
That's exactly what we're doing. And David, I don't know if you want to just briefly comment on the work that you've been doing over the last few weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Yeah, so what we're doing at the moment is just speaking to key community groups across all localities and just seeing what their plans are for winter. Are they going to put any specific activities on, or open buildings up, or are they going to, as Claire was saying before, perhaps expand what they're doing, because there's lots of things happening in communities already, and people may we may see more people going to luncheon clubs, etc. And to follow that up, really, is just say what help, is there any gaps, and what help might they need over winter, and things like energy costs. Maybe something where we get requests, and also with the community food banks and larders, again, when we've done this for the last two winters, is just an early sight of what they may need. Is it going to be help with food stocks, help with volunteers, help with distribution, just so we've got a good picture of that. And once we've got that information, we'll be looking to make that accessible and put it on the PKC webpage along with other relevant information, so people know what's going on in their localities. And as Claire was saying before, it kind of destigmatizes it a little bit. You're just going along to a group that's already happening in your area, rather than a cozy place, if you like. So
that's great. One of the things that might be an issue for us is the elderly who don't have access to that social media, and they'll get cold. They don't have the. I think we know what I'm saying. So listen, I wish you well with that. All the best. Thank you.
And I think what we would want to add, Councillor Allen, for all 40 councillors of the council is to work in collaboration with the officers to raise the things that you know about in your ward, to feed into the mapping that we're doing and the work that we're doing. Because we want to support your constituents just as much as you do. And it's all about us all working together on this. Councillor Nicole.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Claire, for the report. It's very, very fulsome, but also very depressing, I suppose, a little bit. I have a couple of questions and maybe a comment. The question really is about what defines a household or a family. You referenced several times in the slides about families and about households, but I'm just wondering if that includes those households where there is someone who lives alone, or single person households in that category. And if it doesn't, do we have any understanding or any sort of data to suggest how many of these single occupancy homes exist currently in Perth and Kinross? So that's the first question. Sort of related to that is many vulnerable adults, particularly those with additional support needs or those with particular health or learning disabilities, do often live alone, and they're supported by our care at home providers. And you've mentioned reaching out to community groups. So I'm just wondering what work we're doing to reach out to the care at home providers, who very often may be the only person that these individuals of our citizens actually communicate with, whether or not they are also kept fully up to date with what is being prepared here, and if they're engaged, in fact, to get any feedback from them. I know from my own personal experience that care at home providers do not believe, for example, that the community fridges are accessible to them or to the clients that they support, and I have encouraged those I know to at least consider using them. So if you have some information on that, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor McCall. And yes, absolutely. Single households, the definition of a household obviously absolutely includes single person households. And I would say that single households and single income households on low incomes are at risk, at greater risk. In terms of your question regarding people with additional support needs and indeed reaching in, and I think, you know, going back to the earlier question there about elderly people, we will reaching in a community point of view, but also in an individual household point of view, as and when is required. And we have got colleagues, senior colleagues from our Health and Social Care Partnership involved in the more strategic group and with the wider operational group as well. And we will be engaging with care at home providers, and through the awareness raising activity that I described that Lynn and Nick from the Welfare Rights team, the work that they are doing, certainly will have that reach in terms of awareness raising for staff and indeed other services and agencies, so they know where to go for support and how to support the clients that they're working with. So please be assured in that respect.
Thank you very much, Claire. And because it's related to this, I'm just going to make a very quick comment. You mentioned it with people with medical needs in terms of equipment and being able to run that equipment, but there are also people with dietary needs, medical dietary needs. That's equally important, and the cost of living or the cost of some of those products and the availability indeed has been steadily increasing for the past few years. And it's quite a significant issue, and it's perhaps something to be talking to the community groups who run the community fridges to how they can make some of those products available. Thank you.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Convener. I'm just following on first question, follows on from Councillor Allen regarding the rent situation. Even with a rent freeze, many of our tenants will find it difficult to pay because obviously as bills go up, it gets more and more difficult. I presume that will have a knock-on effect, the income to us, that will have a knock-on effect on our ability to follow through on our projects.
Yes, I mean, you know, I think as we all know, and as we've probably spoken at length within this committee, any kind of arrears debt obviously does impact in terms of the housing revenue account. I'm speaking on behalf of Elaine here. It does impact, and then that will be, as we're doing, I mean, you can see the reprioritisation to ensure that we're focusing absolutely, you know, focusing on need in terms of our service delivery. So, you know, we will continue as we had done right the way throughout COVID to assess and monitor the situation, the impact on the housing revenue account, and ensure that we're focusing and prioritising our work on the areas of greatest need.
Thanks. The other question relates to the numbers of people seeking help, because there's been very little assistance offered to small businesses. I'm thinking of small businesses who are in perhaps hospitality. There's more coffee shops, there's more restaurants, hotels. They've all suffered through the COVID pandemic. Many are just starting to recover. They obviously have rising energy bills. There's no cap on their energy bills. That's on one side. On the other side, of course, they're worried about the number of customers who actually come in to use their services because people can't afford those sort of luxuries. So we may see people being laid off again in those industries and workplaces. So our numbers will go up. People seeking help, not necessarily always our tenants. Are we geared up to help in that capacity? Because it could become a considerable rise.
Yeah, and I think you raise a good point there as well. I think there's absolutely no doubt in terms of the wider support. You will know all of the support that was delivered throughout COVID to businesses across Perth and Kinross, and I think the council had a very positive response and support and feedback from businesses in terms of the support that was provided. Teams will continue to support, as they always have done, in terms of in whatever way they can, and we've got good engagement, I think, across smaller and indeed larger businesses, and we will continue to do so.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Claire, for your presentation. Almost it's a blizzard of often very dispiriting statistics, and given the situation we're in, it's almost in a tsunami of an increase in demand. Now, you referred to the various community groups, to volunteers, to partners, to employers, but my question is in relation to, and I'm aware clearly of the constraints we have on resources, but with our staffing capacity, what position do you consider we're in? And I'm not talking just about welfare rights. I think everyone agrees, just the fantastic job they do. But in terms of frontline staff, and to be able to link in also with those community groups, how are we placed at the moment?
I think you raise a good question. I think in terms of, you can see the stats on the slide in terms of the additional demand across organisations. I've had recent email communication with one of our third sector organisations. They've managed to sort of lever in additional resource and capacity. You're aware of the additional capacity that has been put within the welfare rights team, which has been a huge and welcome help. Similarly, I know the housing team in terms of welfare rights have put additional capacity. So I think that kind of assessment in terms of the demand, ensuring that we're focusing and collectively working together, and I think the partnership approach really supports that, so we're not having levels of duplication, so that staff are absolutely clear of what's required, and the awareness raising, the signposting and the information that we do really does support staff on the front line. But all managers and heads of service across the organisation are continuing to monitor the situation with their staff and with their teams, and ensuring that we've got the right people in the right place supporting those most vulnerable. And I think there's real opportunities in terms of the partnership approach that we've been taking and the learning from COVID, whereby we did come together in that very kind of more collaborative way to really ensure that we're working together and not kind of overlapping and duplicating with each other. But it's something that we are live to and need to continue to assess to ensure that we've got the right people delivering at the front line where they're needed most.
Can I just say thank you? I think the clear point is it is a crisis, and the real concern is also the uncertainty as to where we might just be in 3-6 months' time. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to comments. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks very much, Tom. I think just following directly on from what Stuart says, it is a crisis. And I think that there needs to be some way of monitoring that crisis. I appreciate all the work that officers are doing, but I think there also needs to be some sort of political oversight or elected member oversight of how we respond and how we adapt to ensure that we do that with sufficient agility and speed. I was really interested to hear the comments that you made regarding the free school meals, Claire, because I think there was issues in the next meeting this afternoon regarding underspends in early learning and childcare and breakfast clubs, although I think that was about over anticipating demand. It's really fast moving. When I left to come into the council this morning, the news reports were of the rent freeze lasting until the 31st of March, and by the time I got to park the car at Canal Street, there was talk about that of being extended beyond the end of March, which would clearly have an impact on the housing revenue account. So I think there's really tricky, thorny and difficult issues to address with regard to affordability. We know, from previous experience about building up pent-up demand for homelessness as a consequence of people not paying their rent. So early engagement with private sector tenants, landlords, as well as our own tenants is going to be critical to preventing that being a kind of post April demand for homeless services, which again just generates costs and doesn't do anybody any good. So I think we do need to give consideration to how are we going to gear up to meet this both at an officer level but also at a political level too.
Thank you very much. Councillor Leishman.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to our Executive Lead on Strategy, Claire Mailer, and all her colleagues for the report. Firstly, I'd like to take this opportunity to commend our housing service, especially for the work they've done to prevent homelessness. We are fortunate to have a workforce that has helped make Perth and Kinross Council one of Scotland's leading local authorities in tackling this particular field, and the figures for 2021/22 show that we're continuing to build on this. And of course, praise should also go to the previous Housing Committee and their conveners. Our Council's Home First approach to tackling homelessness was adopted with the aim of providing a direct route for homeless people into settled accommodation, therefore reducing the need for temporary accommodation and minimising the duration, impact, stigma and the cost of homelessness. Among the successes are a 9% reduction in homeless presentations compared to a Scotland-wide 3% rise over the last year, having the shortest length of stay in temporary accommodation at an average of 60 days as opposed to the Scottish national average of 207 days, and Perth and Kinross having an average duration of homelessness at 64 days against a Scottish national average of 256 days. It's great to see that Perth and Kinross is bucking the national trend on this. However, with the scandalous increases to energy bills, rising food costs and hikes in petrol prices, people in all our wards are facing the real prospect of descending into poverty. It's not an exaggeration to say that we will have to deal with a catastrophe, as there will be people all over our region that will have to make the decision of heating their home or eating a meal this winter time. The figures presented to us today are beyond stark, and it's likely that 72% of people in Scotland will be living in fuel poverty come January. And of course, these awful set of circumstances will be exacerbated with the struggles many people are experiencing with deteriorating mental health, something that sadly comes up all too often in conversation with residents. The amount of people we have earning less than the living wage and the amount of people in lower paid work is frankly staggering. It would be fair to say that we have seen a decimation of the working class and a restructuring of society, with people living in work poverty being unable to actually participate and enjoy our society as wages continue to stagnate and the cost of essentials escalate the way that they are. It's heartbreaking that we have the societal inequalities we have in Scotland, with the gap getting wider due to the austerity measures we've been subjected to for more than a decade now. To finish on, I'll echo the convener's comments from a few moments ago. It's imperative that we as a council continue to work together to help our residents through these dreadful, dreadful times. It's going to be a strain on our resources and workforce, and difficult decisions will have to be made. But as I said earlier at the start of this comment, we're going to tackle these problems with the attributes of an excellent workforce. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no other comments indicated, so I'd like to thank Claire and Carol for this very informative report, and obviously the hard work that's ahead of you in keeping us informed as councillors so that we can support you and help the work that you're doing to move this forward. Thank you. Item 7, I will now hand over to my Vice Convener, Councillor McCall, who's going to take the next item.
Thank you, Convener, and still just good morning, everyone. This report is the Community Planning Partnership update, and can I ask Lee Haxton to introduce the report, please? Is Lee there?
So I was working my way around the room there, Councillor McCall. Apologies. Thank you.
I couldn't see. I could only see people.
Hiding at the back. Sorry, Councillor.
That's fine.
Yeah, good morning, councillors. This is the most recent update from the Community Planning Partnership activity and covers the period from the last update to committee, which was from the 15th of June. The report's split into 4 main sections and in summary covers our ongoing review of the Local Outcomes Improvement Plan, which is our strategy for tackling inequality across Perth and Kinross, Some examples of the work that we're proposing to undertake are provided. We're taking the final document to the Community Planning Partnership Board on Friday this week and to full council at the end of the month. There's an update on some locality work in Cooperangus, where we have an initial focus due to some of the live issues that council officers are dealing with. That work split into 3 main elements, which are summarised in the report. The report also covers the early work of the Climate Change Working Group that the Community Planning Partnership Board has established. The next meeting taking place later this month is focusing on transport and fleet management. And the last section covers the Period Products Initiative, which we've been running now for some years, but got some further attention recently with the legislation coming into force on the 15th of August. My service manager, David Stoko, and I are happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. I don't see any questions in the chat column, but if there's any questions from the floor, if somebody can let me know who's got their hands raised or would like to speak. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just a quick question on 5.2, the Cash First partnership. It's the first time I've seen it come through. If you could just give us a bit more detail. I think I understand where you're going from, but if you could just give us a bit more detail, thank you.
In summary, the majority of the support services that we have just now, that often their first port of call would be a food bank for some emergency assistance. So it's trying to, over a period of time, change that so that the focus is on maximising income. Not saying that a reference to a food bank wouldn't be available, but trying to stop that kind of cycle of dependency that can sometimes occur. So it's about trying to maximise people's income.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. And I think I have Councillor Donaldson next, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Could I ask Lee, it's the section on locality working, item 6. You refer to Cooperangus, and I'm sure many people in Cooperangus, in particular, will welcome, and in Strathmore more widely, will welcome the likely reopening of the town hall come December this year. But could I ask about, 1, South Crieff, what are the timelines there? What local actions are you looking to take, in particular, given the high level of child poverty in South Crieff, and it's one of the highest in Perth and Kinross outside of Perth City? And secondly, beyond, and it's obviously the question of staff capacity arises again, are you looking to take action in other specific areas further out?
Yeah, thank you. Brief response, if I might, then I'll ask David to cover as he's kind of leading on that. But one of the reasons we identified South Crieff was very much, as you say, because of the child poverty stats, which highlighted that as an area that we needed to focus on. And the idea is that this is a new way of working, which, if successful, will be rolled out in other areas of Perth and Kinross. But I'll let David deal with the other element, if that's okay.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks for the question. Yes, so the CPP board identified 2 areas for locality work, and as Lee said, to try new ways of working. We prioritised Cooperangus fairly on a pragmatic reasons, which there were quite a few live issues. We had a workshop looking at South Crieff earlier this year, and we had a few questions around that, and to be honest, we had some gaps in our knowledge about what some community groups were doing, the kind of physical assets that were being used, and some of the perhaps the barriers to employment as well. So we carried out basically a mapping exercise, and we just actually received the first draft of that. Tracy Ramsey, our CLD working area, has done that, and I'm sure you know. So she set out what groups are doing, what the various buildings are. So I think we'd be looking. We'd obviously want to take back to CPP board how the work's gone for Cooperangus. We have got the immediate work in all localities around cost of living, as Claire has set out. So I think any work in South Crieff, in reality, we'd probably be looking kind of later in the winter or early spring.
Okay, thank you. And nothing further. I look forward to any updates, as I'm sure my fellow ward councillors will as well in Stratham. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. And Councillor Barrett, Peter Barrett, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Vice Convener. And it was with regard to the second bullet in paragraph 5.2, which refers to people seeking asylum and refugees. And the final sentence of that bullet, which says that the support will continue while there is a need. Now, it's extremely laudable commitment, but there is a significant cost attached to that, and there's also, I think, a significant rising demand for those services. And I think with regard to the UK dispersal programme for people, for refugees, and the Scottish super sponsorship scheme for people from Ukraine, as well as question marks over whether the £350 per month payment for homes from Ukraine is going to continue as well. There are real issues in terms of the demand on this council, who don't have a dedicated resettlement team to deal with people under both of those schemes, and I wondered what consideration had been given either to approaching both the UK and the Scottish governments to ensure that the sorts of supports that we've been able to provide to date, we can continue to do so, and that they be sustainable into the future.
I think that might be a question for Barbara or Claire to take, if that's okay.
I'll start, maybe Elaine, because Elaine's been working very much more closely, but this is, Councillor Barrett, an ongoing discussion, you will be aware through COSLA as well, the issues both with the Scottish Government and the UK Government to ensure that there is sufficient funding to be able to deliver the services that need to be delivered, and the ongoing support for those either seeking asylum or refugees as well. But Elaine, I don't know whether there's anything else you would want to add to that.
Thanks, Barbara. In terms of the resettlement team, we have created a virtual resettlement team within Perth and Kinross, and that's working fairly well with both our Ukrainian asylum seekers, and we're just about to appoint a manager for that team. We're not having a dedicated team within housing, but housing will lead on it, but it's very much a multi-agency partnership approach, and that's how we're taking it forward there. In terms of asylum seekers and money, through the dispersal programme which you referred to, there is a budget and money attached to that, and that's the first time ever that local authorities out with Glasgow will start to receive some funding for asylum seekers within their area. And I'm working with my colleagues in health and social care who are leading on that to look at what the infrastructure will be required for that. But to give assurance, we are working hard, there is funding there, and we're providing our feedback through COSLA and all the other working groups regarding the current budget in terms of the £350 payment. There has been a nudge on that to increase that in terms of the cost of living, and that's currently being considered by the UK Government.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Barrett?
Insofar as we can, I think, right, Vice Convener, I think the challenges and the numbers are going to be huge, and it'll be a rapidly changing situation that we'll need to continue to monitor closely.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. I see no other questions in the chat, so now I'll move the report, and then I will seek any comments that anybody wants to make. If you want to make a comment on the report, then please, if you can have access to the chat, please just put a C in the chat box for those in the chamber in particular. Otherwise, if you raise your hand, committee officers will advise me. So this report covers a number of key areas of work led and supported by the Community Planning Partnership. The Community Planning Partnership has a shared statutory duty to tackle inequality in Perth and Kinross. The Local Outcomes Improvement Plan is the shared strategy for doing so, and it includes a series of actions which partners can collectively take to make a positive difference. The report also sets out what partners are doing in relation to locality work in Cooper Angus, our collective to the climate emergency, and the Period Products Free Provision Scotland Act 2021. You're asked to note the report, and I'm happy to move that we do so.
I'm happy to second your report.
Thank you, Convener. Is everybody happy for us to note the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. And are there any comments on the report, please? I don't see any comments. Well, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. The report is duly noted. And I'll hand back to you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCall. For item 8 on the agenda, I'm going to move to Vice Convener Welsh to take this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Convener. Item 8 is the Annual Assurance Statement 2021-22 from the Scottish Housing Regulator. Can I ask Elaine Ritchie, the Senior Service Manager, to introduce the report, please?
Thanks, Vice Convener. This report seeks committee approval on the Housing Services Annual Assurance Statement and approval to submit the statement to the Scottish Housing Regulator. As some members are aware, in order to comply with the Scottish Housing Regulator's regulatory framework, the Council must approve and submit an annual assurance statement, giving assurance that it's meeting legislative regulatory standards for social housing in Scotland. This is the third year that landlords have been required to publish an annual assurance statement. The service has a range of self-assessment, quality assurance, scrutiny and monitoring arrangements in place to ensure the continued delivery of high-quality services. We also have well-established mechanisms in place to seek feedback from tenants through complaints, tenant satisfaction arrangements, but also through the scrutiny work from our SURE team. Appendix 1 to the report provides an awareness of some of the information that supports the statement. Committee will note that 15 of our 6,503 domestic gas safety checks were not completed by the anniversary date. 14 checks were delayed due to the ongoing challenging circumstances presented by COVID and 1 due to a miscommunication with our contractor. The health, safety and wellbeing, along with the wishes of our tenants, have continued to be our priority, and we've continued to follow national guidance in respect of this activity. I can therefore advise committee that during 2021-22, Perth and Kinross Housing Service complied with all except one regulatory requirement, and I'm confident we have achieved all the standards and outcomes of the Scottish Social Housing Charter for tenants, people who are homeless and others who use our service within our legal obligations relating to housing, homelessness, equalities, human rights and tenant and resident safety. Finally, throughout the year, committee has received several key reports providing assurance that we are delivering and exceeding the standards required by the Scottish Housing Regulator as outlined in Appendix 1, and that the Housing Service continues to deliver high levels of service with strong performance across all areas and ongoing high levels of tenant satisfaction despite the ongoing impacts and challenges faced by the service. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elaine, for delivering that report. Can I ask if anyone has any questions at this stage? I think obviously the report's pretty clear, and the performance that we're doing is in line with expectations and requirements of the regulator. I think I have got a question from Councillor Peter Barrett.
Yeah, thanks very much, Vice Convener. The report makes mention of the Scottish Housing Regulator setting out plans in April of this year as to how it is going to engage with all landlords and 32 local authorities. Are there different levels of engagement, as in, whether you're going to have a light touch in review or level of engagement, or whether there's, much more in-depth involvement, perhaps due to the return that was made?
Can I ask Elaine to answer that, please?
Thanks, Councillor Barrett. In terms of the level of scrutiny or the assessment, it's based on key areas. So all 32 local authorities have an engagement plan with the regulator. For Perth and Kinross, it's regarding homelessness, and that's based on a generic assessment that they've made throughout Scotland because of the impacts of the challenges of COVID. In terms of a light touch, we met with them and gave them assurance regarding our policies and procedures, and they raised no concerns. Other local authorities have concerns with rent arrears, so it depends on what the actual local authority's performance is, and that's how they determine the level of their assessment and scrutiny.
Thank you, Elaine. We don't seem to have any other questions from committee members. I have one comment, and that's from Councillor Bob Braun. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Convener. The annual assurance statement put forward in this paper is a representation of the high levels of commitment provided by the Housing Service against the backdrop of continuing difficult challenges, not least that of the COVID pandemic. The statement relates to the year 2021-2022 and reflects the importance of the Housing Service to the previous administration, not just for this year, but for the last 5 years. And that is to continue to provide new properties and to enhance existing properties, making them safe and secure and energy efficient. The ongoing aim to give our tenants the best possible. Whilst this committee is currently under new management, from our various discussions, I'm assured, Convener, that you would wish to continue along the same path, giving the same importance to this service. With most of our tenants, 82% acknowledging satisfaction against a national average of 77%. All praise is due to our officers in the Housing Service and to their hard work and professionalism, which has made this council the envy of others. Thank you, Vice Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. I will now move the report if there's no further questions or comments. This report notes the requirement of the Council to submit and approve an annual assurance statement which provides assurance that the Housing Service is meeting legislative and regulatory standards for social housing in Scotland. This report provides a brief overview of the framework and appends the 2021-22 annual assurance statement. During 2021-22, Perth and Kinross Housing Service complied with all but one regulatory requirement as set out in Chapter 3 of the Scottish Housing Regulators Framework. Appendix 1 of the report details an overview of the information that supports the annual assurance statement and the evidence required by the Scottish Housing Regulator, which is supported by the findings of the SURE team and the results of the Tenant Satisfaction Survey. As noted, the Council's Housing Service continues to deliver strong performance across all areas within the service. This performance, along with high levels of customer satisfaction, tenant satisfaction, provides the assurance that the service is delivering good outcomes and services for their tenants and people that use the service, and is in line with the guidance from the Scottish Housing Regulators published regulatory framework. It's an excellent performance. I move the report and I ask committee to approve the recommendations as outlined in section 2.1 of the report. Can I at this stage ask Councillor McEwen to second the report?
Happy to second the report.
Do members have any comments on the report at this point?
No indications in the chamber.
If there are no amendments, can we agree the recommendations as set out in the report, please?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. I'll now hand back to Councillor McEwen, who is going to take the remaining items on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Welsh. We'll now move on to item 9 of the agenda, the release of the new build housing to Kingdom Housing Association. Again, we'll ask Elaine Richard to introduce this report. Thank you.
Thanks, Convener. This report provides an overview of a new build housing development of 18 flats on a Perth and Kinross Council-owned site previously occupied by the Fairfield Community Centre. The report outlines the background to the development and the options that have been considered to approve the proposal to lease the 18 flats to Kingdom Housing Association. In 2018, it was assessed that Fairfield Community Centre was in a dangerous condition and the site was demolished and available for redevelopment in December 2018. In 2018, with discussions with Fairfield Cooperative, they were very keen to take the site forward for affordable housing. However, in December of 2018, the Scottish Housing Regulator intervened in Fairfield Housing Cooperative after identifying serious failures in relation to regulatory standards of governance and financial management. This statutory intervention continued until December 2021, when Fairfield's properties, tenants and staff transferred to Kingdom Housing Association. A formal request to the Scottish Government was submitted to reappraise the grant funding for the project on the basis due to the transfer of Fairfield Housing Cooperative's assets to Kingdom Housing Association. The Scottish Government advised that they were unwilling to consider reappraisal, but recommended leasing the completed units to Kingdom Housing Association or entering into a management agreement. Therefore, this report is proposing that the Council lease the 18 completed units to Kingdom Housing Association for a period of 30 years on a full repair and leasing agreement. As Kingdom Housing Association are members of the Perth and Kinross Common Housing Register and have adopted the Common Allocation Policy, the units will be allocated in the same way from the same waiting list as would the case if they were being let directly by the Council. The benefits of this arrangement are that the units remain in council ownership but provide a standardised service to tenants. It provides stability for the community in Fairfield, which has endured uncertainty over the last few years as a result of statutory intervention by the Scottish Housing Regulator, which resulted in the transfer of assets to a new landlord. It would also consolidate Kingdom Housing Association's position as a state manager with no detrimental impact for the council, our HRA, or for applicants looking to access social housing in Perth and Kinross. Thank you.
I'll move to questions now, Peter Barrett.
Convener, I think my question might just have been answered with the final part of Elaine's introduction there. It was to ask whether there was any net disbenefit to the HRA and investment business plan as a consequence of the leasing agreement compared to if we'd let the houses ourselves.
Sorry, beat you to it. There's no impact to the HRA.
That will teach me for giving advance notice of my questions.
That was nearly na. Not seeing any other questions in the room or in the chat, so I will move the paper as it stands. This report outlines the background to the development and options that have been considered to approve the proposal to lease 18 flats to Kingdom Housing Association. It recommends leasing the completed units to Kingdom Housing Association on a long-term basis to realise benefits, particularly for the local community, and in doing so will consolidate Kingdom Housing Association's position as a state manager with no detrimental impact for the council or for applicants looking to access social housing. This proposal will also enhance our partnership working with Kingdom Housing Association and provide much needed affordable housing within the local area. I move the report and ask the committee to approve the recommendations outlined in section 2.1 of the report. I'll ask for Councillor McCall to second the report, please.
Thank you, Convener. Very happy to second this report.
I'm open for any comments on the report. Councillor Barrett.
Just very briefly, I think to thank officers for their efforts and agility in making sure that we got a workable solution out of this. So thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are no amendments, I agree this report. Agreed. I move on to item 10 on the agenda, which is our last item of business for today, which is the Bobbin Mill Gypsy Traveller site transfer. Can I ask Michelle Dow, as Service Manager for Housing, to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Convener, and good afternoon, because we're into afternoon now, to everyone here today. The report presented to committee members today follows on from a previous committee report at Housing and Communities Committee in March, which supported our continuation to work with residents on our Bobbin Mill Gypsy Traveller site, with a further report to be submitted to a future committee. The report today seeks committee approval to, similar to Double Dykes, transfer the site from our general fund to the housing revenue account. In our earlier report, which is referenced within today's committee report, we outlined the many benefits from the proposal, including, not to mention, an increase in rights in terms of both succession and assignation, together with access to a similar level of service provision to our existing tenants, including, for example, access to additional projects and budgets to support both financial and digital inclusion. In addition to these, the transfer to the housing revenue account would allow the council to establish a long-term and sound financial platform and a long-term investment in the site moving forward, including a planned maintenance programme, all of which would then be funded by the housing revenue account. Since the earlier report, our frontline housing staff, supported by elected members, have continued to work hard to consult and engage with the existing residents. And following some specific reassurances around some of the existing rights in terms of the right to travel being retained, no further concerns have been raised by the residents. It is considered that this proposal is truly in the best interest of our tenants and residents, and although delayed somewhat, the ongoing dialogue with residents over the period has cemented this opinion and approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions on the report? I will then move the report then. This report outlines the work taken to seek approval to transfer the Bobbin Mill Gypsy Travel site from the general fund to the housing revenue account and the engagement work with residents on Bobbin Mill site. I would like to move the paper as this will support the long-term financial platform for residents together with meeting the Scottish Government's commitment to improving the lives of gypsy travellers across a range of spectrums. The move to the housing revenue account will allow officers to look at the long-term financial planning and rent levels. In addition to this, residents will be able to access housing revenue account budgets such as the Tenancy Sustainment Fund and Think Yes Fund, which will help support tenancy sustainment for our residents. I move the report and ask the committee to approve the recommendations outlined in section 2.1 of the report. Can I ask Councillor Welsh to second the report, please?
I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you very much. I have a comment from Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. As I'm sure you'll be aware, the site is within my ward, and I was conscious of the concerns of the residents at Bobbin Mill, but I'm pleased to see that through dialogue, these reservations about the move have been resolved, and I welcome the report today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener. I'd like to say how pleased I am that the Bobbin Mill site will transfer to the housing revenue account following quickly on the heels of the transfer of double dykes that we were informed of at our last committee meeting. I had been pressing for both of these transfers for the whole of the previous council term from both a housing and an equalities perspective, and as a critical step in accessing funding for site improvements and the delivery of better planned maintenance. 5 years on and 3 housing conveners later, today is a memorable day. And Convener, I hope that you will continue to force the pace of progress to deliver on the Scottish Government's commitment to improving the lives of gypsy travellers across Scotland and locally here in Perth and Kinross. I understand that our stage 2 bid for funding to improve the Double Dyke site was submitted at the end of last week and has had positive feedback since then. I think the findings of the local negotiated stopping pilot clearly indicate that a permanent site for short stays is needed to provide a safe place to stop and facilitate better access to services and support, while members of the gypsy traveller community are shifting through Perth and Kinross, and that this is a much needed to improve on the ad hoc arrangements currently at Arran Road. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. And if we have no amendments, can we agree with the recommendations set out in this report? That brings us to the end of today's business on the agenda. Can I thank everyone for your attendance today and for all your contributions? I now formally close the meeting.